By now, you've probably realized who this video is really about.
Hi, welcome back to another Yansem redesign video. There is a lot that we are going to be unpacking today, but before that, as always for new viewers, this is a series. In order to understand what I'm talking about, you should watch my playlist, which I linked below for your convenience. Unless you're okay with being lost, I recommend checking that out first. With that aside, let me quickly explain what the purpose of this video is. In Amai's video, you guys already know that I mentioned how I was having some issues with the writing, and I realized that it was because my take on the story was changing. A lot. This also led me to the conclusion that I was so focused on making an improved version of Yansem in order to please people that I was losing sight of what made this fun for me in the first place. Obviously, that isn't how I should be approaching this project, so I decided to take a step back, block out the noise, and redirect myself to make a story that's enjoyable for me. So here's what's going to go down. I am going to be separating my series from the original Yansem. I know that sounds crazy given that this is a redesign series, but let me make myself a little more clear. I still will be pulling ideas from Yansem, but from now on, this will be my own original story. To be fair, the series was already extremely different from the get, but I felt like it deserved to be its own thing. And just so we're clear, I'm still going to finish the series, and I will get through every rival, but this time I'm going to focus on the fact that this series is also for me as much as it is for my audience. Okay, so I don't want to bore you guys for too long, so let's actually dive into the changes I want to make. So, I am aware that a lot of you were critical about the fact that I was making the story take place in a middle school setting, but a big reason why I did this was because I wanted to keep the seifukus, which in my opinion felt like an integral part of Yansem's identity. But since my story is no longer tied to Yansem, I don't have to keep the uniforms. But I'm not gonna lie, they've grown on me, so I'll still be keeping them. However, I will be aging up my characters to be accurate to the time frame of my story, which I decided would be set in the 1960s. And a quick explanation, it's well known that seifukus are meant for middle schoolers, but historically these uniforms were made for high school students. There is a lot of context for this, but I won't be getting into that for time reasons, but just know that from now on my characters will be aged from 15 to 18. Osana and Ayano are 15, and Taro and Amai would be 16. And I want to clarify real quick that I'm not making this change because I don't think that the concept of a middle school serial killer wouldn't work, as there are cases of real children who are capable of committing heinous crimes. I'm only scrapping this concept because I want to be accurate to the time period that I'm setting my story in. And as you guys already know, my story is inspired from Silent Hill F, which is also set in the 1960s. I'm not gonna lie, before I was pretty indecisive about picking an exact era, especially since there were a lot of things I would have to work around just to be accurate to that time frame. But in the end, I decided that the Showa era would fit best. And honestly, the aesthetic of the Showa era boosts the horror angle I'm going for anyway, so it all works out in the end. Okay, before I get into this segment of the video, I want to reiterate that this still will not be a real game. I'm sorry to disappoint you guys again, but I don't care enough to make this project anything bigger than what it already is. I know people have been recommending that I at least do something like making a comic, a visual novel, or even a novel, but I don't want to. And before I get any comments that are upset with me quote-unquote wasting my ideas, which by the way, I don't like that viewpoint, the intention of the series was always meant for entertainment purposes. But that's not to say that I'm wasting these ideas. If anything, the research I do will always come in handy if I ever plan on making a project like this again. Plus, I can recycle these ideas and implement them into other projects in the future. And as some of you may know, I already have my own original characters who have their own story, which are way more important to me than my reimagined Yansem characters. Don't get me wrong, I love sharing my ideas and I appreciate everyone's support, but I'd rather have fun instead of turning this into a serious project. I do understand that people want a completed version of Yansem, but honestly, I'm not the person you guys are looking for. I'm just an individual artist that's passionate about character design and storytelling. I do want to take a moment real quick just to appreciate the game devs that have been trying to reach out to me, but like I said, I'd rather be more relaxed with my project. However, if you like my series enough to where you're inspired by it, then you have my permission to take inspiration from my ideas to make your own Yansem game. But with my long rant over, let's get back on topic. I know I originally said that I wanted my vision for the game to take on a low poly graphics art style, but the more I illustrated things for the series, I honestly felt like a visual novel style mixed with a point and click style would work better. And while it wasn't a real inspiration, I felt like the tension would be a perfect example of this. This will also add into the story focused aspect of my game, with there being a limited amount of eliminations and all. And also, I have an official map just so you guys can have a better idea of the different locations. I didn't want to reveal everything immediately since I plan on showing more of it in the future, but just letting you know the secret areas are all meant to be every rival's special location. I know that some of you are probably thinking, Casserole, you literally ranted so much about simplicity being important. Why is the map so big? Well, here's the thing. The game is no longer free roaming, and the majority of the story will take place at the school. The extra areas would only be applied in cutscenes. In short, everything still will be simplified. The map is mostly just for me to give you an idea of how the small town is mapped out. I'm gonna need you guys to lock in for this segment of the video. This will be the biggest change I'm making, which is renaming my redesigns, and making them my own original characters. Recently, I have been receiving a lot of complaints about my designs being drastically different from the originals, which is kind of the point because they're meant to be redesigns, but aside from that, I thought it would be best to rename the cast to further separate them from their former selves. So hopefully from this point, I will no longer receive any more comments about this. I should also mention that if you've been following me, then you already know that I already intended to rename my characters by the end of the series. This was just because I wanted the name changes to feel more special. But like I said, I already want to separate my series from Yansim, so I will be doing this early instead. Plus, I'd rather you guys recognize these characters as my characters rather than Alex's characters. But with that said, let me reintroduce you to everyone. And real quick, I will be introducing them by Japanese name principle, so last names will come first. Starting off with our main protagonist, formerly known as Aishi Ayano, we have Kurosawa Ichika. For her surname, I honestly just wanted her to have a K name, so I'm settling on Kurosawa for now. But as for her first name, the reason why I chose Ichika was because it meant single flower, which I found fitting for her theme of isolation and the whole floral theme I have going on for the story. Originally, I was going to just name her Wallflower in Japanese, but I decided against it because, honestly, that's pretty on the nose and corny. Other than that, some of you have noticed that I've been moving Ichika's ponytail to be lower. While this seems insignificant, the reason why I made this change was because I wanted to make Ichika look less like Ayano. But I do acknowledge that it will still feel like Ayano to a lot of people, but I'm not gonna lie, I grew super attached to the ponytail, so I felt pretty stubborn and I wanted to keep it. And maybe some of you won't agree with this, but I do feel like the art style does help separate Ichika from the former. You see, the thing is, a lot of you guys keep saying that you love my art style, but I want to clarify that this isn't even my art style. I made myself draw in a semi-realism style just for this series specifically. Whether you agree or disagree, the style does make a huge difference. Because hypothetically, if this were a real game, you can clearly see the difference between the visuals in my story versus Yansim. But just to help my case a little more, I decided that from now on I will only be drawing the long sleeve uniforms for my redesigns, because not only does it just look nicer, but it's also easier as a design format for my future characters. Aside from that, I made an official character profile, and as a bonus feature, I made a bloody version of her design. For story changes, everything is pretty much still the same. Ichika will still suffer from generational trauma and the expectations of her traditional parents. The only change I've made is that Ichika is actually from the city. Her father decides that he wants to get away from all the noise, so their family decides to move into the small town of Kanashima. Credits to this commenter for the name, by the way. In my story, Kanashima is a fictional town located in the northern region of Japan. It's a small area that nobody in their right mind would ever want to live in due to how gloomy the climate is, and not to mention how the tight-knit community can feel suffocating at times. But in the Kurosawa's case, they simply just wanted a comfortable lifestyle that lacked any crime. Ichika had just graduated from her middle school, so her being a high school freshman would make it easier for her to assimilate in a new area. Her lack of friends also makes it easier for her to move on to this new town, plus her parents don't really pay her any mind since she's extremely well behaved. More importantly, she's extremely pliable to become a bride. In school, a lot of people obviously grow curious of the new girl who's from the city, but Ichika's quiet nature gives her an air of mystery, which further isolates her from her peers. In reality, Ichika is a shy wallflower that isn't quite sure of how to socialize. Her morbid interest doesn't seem to help her case, especially since it seems unexpected for a young girl like her. Everyone is still friendly towards Ichika and wants to become her friend, but nobody is able to break through her barriers. That is until a certain boy from her neighborhood barges himself into her life. Next we have the infamous Yamada Taro, or in this case, Takahashi Naoji. I chose Takahashi because it's a common surname, but for his first name, I was going to explain the meaning behind it, but I won't for now. Aside from that, since my redesign is already extremely different, I didn't make any changes besides refining his uniform and making tweaks to his accessories. Story-wise, I also didn't change much, but I did decide to refine some things. Naoji is known to be Kanashima's pride and joy. He goes above and beyond to help others, and is known to be great with people. The guys envy him, but they can't hate him since he's helped every one of them. Obviously, the ladies dig him, and especially a certain someone, but that's besides the point. Naoji may seem happy and upbeat, but he does have some struggles with his mother being ill. He doesn't mention it much, but he likes to distract himself by helping other people. As for his sister, I won't be getting too much into her, but you'll hear more about her in the future. The main thing is, Naoji is your guy if you need help. Need an ear for your problems? Naoji is there. Having some issues with mundane tasks? Well, Naoji is on the way. If someone's picking on you, then Naoji has your back. Of course, Naoji's sense of justice wouldn't have existed without his father, the head chief of the police department. Though small, they do their best when it comes to protecting Kanashima. It's the reason why there hasn't been any extreme crime cases after all, at least for now. And we have the fan favorite, Najimi Osana, but now, Shizuka Hinabi. I chose Shizuka since it means forest child and her special location is in the forest. As for her first name, I know that I wanted something to match her attitude, so I chose Hinabi, which means fire and beauty. Like Ichika, I did lower her hair into lower pigtails. Initially, I was going to choose a style from the get, but I mentioned in her video that I was low-key panicking and just picked something just to pick it, and I didn't hate her original hairstyle, but it was a bit childish for my new vision for her, so I decided that it would still exist as her old hairstyle, but other than that, that's pretty much it for the tweaks in her design. As for her character, most of the things I've already established are still canon. But like Naoji, let me refine some things. Ever since middle school, Hinabi has done the most to fit in with the other girls. She's tried almost everything from engaging with popular subjects, bringing flashy things to school, which was confiscated. She even goes as far as breaking the school dress code just to show off her cute accessories to the other girls, which also got confiscated, and also led to the staff having to talk with her father. The school staff aren't very fond of Hinabi due to her attitude and because of her low marks, and while she isn't exactly dumb, focusing in class becomes a bit of a difficult challenge for her. Not to mention the amount of animal doodles in her notebooks. Another reason why she constantly gets into trouble is because of her brown hair. She constantly has to prove that it's her natural color. Even her father defends her on this. Luckily, the school did stop questioning her about this. But these incidents haven't gone unnoticed by her classmates, which resulted in some gossiping and a bit of teasing. But beyond this, Hinabi had assumed that her inability to fit in must have stemmed from the fact that she had always been surrounded by men, especially since she was heavily associated with Naoji. After all, the two were known to be the biggest duo in Kanashima, which spread the false impression that Hinabi was a tomboy. It only makes sense to Hinabi that this would be the case, but in truth, it isn't. Most people get the feeling that Hinabi feels a bit off. While she does get teased, nobody directly bullies her since she is Naoji's friend, but people won't dare to pursue her. Even more so due to her blunt nature, which people misinterpret as her being rude and cold. But as you guys already know, the real reason for Hinabi being ostracized is because she's autistic, with no one but her and her father being aware of this. It's also the reason why Hinabi never worries much about becoming a bride, because unlike most, her father doesn't want to force that life onto her. Compared to most men in his time, he's considered to be pretty progressive. Still, this doesn't dismiss the fact that he's hardly there for his daughter since he's so busy with work, which would leave her in the care of the Takahashis. To the Takahashis, Hinabi is like a second daughter, and over the years she had always been in their care. It's one of the reasons why both Naoji and Hinabi were close in the first place, other than the fact that their fathers were also close pals as well. But as Hinabi has grown, she has slowly distanced herself from the Takahashis. This isn't because of any resentment towards them, but because she wants to become more independent so her father can stop worrying about her. It's another reason why she hates being treated like a child. But whether Hinabi acknowledges it or not, this does cause Naoji to worry about her. And her lack of communication makes him believe that she hates him, when that isn't even the case. Regardless, their relationship does become strained. But after a certain Kurosawa moves into the neighborhood, both Naoji and Hinabi's paths cross once more. And of course, depending on what route you chose, it could be for the best or the worst. Since Amai's video is still pretty fresh, I don't feel the need to refine much about her character, but for her name change, I decided on Tanaka Yuki. Tanaka is just a common last name, but Yuki is low-key just a placeholder for now since she's still pretty new to the cast. I do want to reiterate that her family is well known for their amazing skills as chefs, and it's almost impossible for their little food stall to not be open. Whether business is slow or it happens to be a rainy day, the Tanakas will always be there to prepare a delicious meal. Of course, this does cause their daughter to become overlooked, but never mind that. We've already discussed much about her before. Heyo, Future Casserole here. For a while now, I've been meaning to clarify some things, but I never had the time to because I didn't want it to cut into Amai and Osana's videos. So I'm just taking the opportunity to clarify some things and fix my mistakes here. Starting off with my first big mistake was my implementation of wagashi. A commenter did point out to me how my implementation of wagashi was very inaccurate to actual Japanese culture because the dessert isn't just meant to be decorative, it also is used in tea ceremonies and is also used in festivals. I do feel very dumb for this because in Chinese culture we have something similar, which is mooncakes. So this did put into perspective how inaccurate my idea sounded. I'm going to be taking the opportunity to not only fix this, but also better tie this into my story so it feels more intentional. Before that, I want to clarify real quick that I decided to get rid of clubs, gameplay-wise anyways. Characters like Yuki will still be in clubs, but you as a player are not able to join these clubs. I just felt like it was unrealistic for Ichika to be able to join clubs back-to-back depending on her rival, and I also don't believe that a real Japanese school would allow someone to switch clubs so recklessly, even in a fictional setting. This does mean I have to change Yuki and Ichika's story a little, so instead I decided that Kaneshima High School is preparing for an upcoming school festival. Naoji and Yuki are able to meet more often just because they both participate in club activities, which causes them to bump into each other more often. Ichika notices this, so she takes the liberty to help out with the cooking club and joins as a volunteer to help with making more desserts for this festival. And since Kaneshima is an extremely small town, they need all the help they can get. This will also be a smoother way to transition from Yuki to Kisana because, as you know, you are helping prepare for the festival, but when the festival does come, this is where Kisana will be able to shine. Some of you were also questioning how the time frame of my story would work, and realistically, I would imagine 1 to 2 years max. You still will defeat rivals within the span of a week, but that's mostly just gameplay-wise. Since my take is more story-focused, there will be some time skips just to give the characters some breathing room for each death. It's a bit hard to explain this, so I'll be putting up an image to give you guys an example of what's going on inside my head. The next thing I want to talk about is how I will handle buff items. I've had some people questioning the purpose of this, because I never went too much into depth in my videos, and that's because, honestly, the more my story has begun to change, buff items started to feel more like an afterthought, so I've been treating them as such. And initially, the purpose of them was so it could give the players buffs such as skill buffs, strength buffs, or even smarts buffs. But that only applied when I was still trying to make this a sandbox type of game where you can run around and start killing people. But since I'm no longer doing that and I want to focus more on the story aspect, I am deciding to make the buffs more like achievements instead. But just so they aren't completely useless, I imagine that depending on the route you took to collect these items, you do get a secret ending, which I will probably reveal by the end of the series. And while we're on the topic of routes, I do want to clarify some things about my take on a neutral route. Last video, I briefly mentioned some things about a neutral route because I kept receiving comments about whether or not I'm deciding to implement this. And I imagine hypothetically if this were a real game that it would exist, but since I'm more focused on the storytelling for the pacifist and massacre route, that it would be difficult for me to also focus on adding a neutral route since there are so many rivals, meaning so many different paths and possibilities. So for now, I'm not going to be going too much into depth for how a neutral route would work. So I'm gonna let you guys headcanon or interpret however you think it would work. And with that, I think that should be all of the things that I wasn't able to correct and fix from my previous videos. So I feel better after getting that off my chest. Okay, future casserole out. And we are finally done with the new overhaul! I know that this video was pretty packed, but thanks so much for listening to me ramble for this long. This video was so info-dumpy, but it's pretty relevant before I can continue with my series. And I'll be working on Kizana next. Like the rest of the cast, I will also be giving her a new name, but I won't reveal that until her video comes, so stay tuned for now. But before I end the video, I have been getting some questions about contacting and where to submit fan art. Sorry for not mentioning this sooner, but in the description you can find my card linked below, which shows my different social media platforms, and any of the socials that I have linked in my card you can use to submit fan art. Simply tag me and I'll be able to see it. You can even do this for YouTube by posting in your community notes, which some of you have already done. And this is a perfect segue to show off some of the fan art and fan edits that I have received. If you want to join the collection, please do. And as for contacting, I have my email linked below, but please only message me for business purposes. And also, please don't use any of my social media platforms to contact me because I will not respond. But with that all cleared up, I'm finally out, and bye-bye!
Ah!